another video. In this video, I will be doing an in-depth analysis at what we would now consider woke mentality. And in understanding woke mentality, I will now separate the two political parties apart from the woke mentality itself in order to see where the mentality of the wokeism tends to lean towards, if you get my drift. Now, in terms of the woke mentality, we essentially see that these individuals are educated folk, hence their wokeism. They are of a university education, they have undergone their training, on and on and on, which means they are technically of a certain logical standpoint of things, if you wish. But in the development of their logical perspective, they began to see the underdevelopment of their emotional processing skills, which now, through the increase of world stimulus rather than school stimulus, which school and the world is not the same environment. And in this wokeism, we then see that upon leaving the university education system, based on this environment change, we then see what arises essentially as the rise of the trigger. Based on the rise of the trigger, similar to a hammer and sickle type approach to leftism, similar to a hammer and sickle type approach, the trigger, another new symbol of communism, which is a leftist ideology. In this particular trigger, you see that the individuals are at a standpoint where they say, because I exist, the world is not allowed to trigger me anywhere I go. And based on the fact that everywhere I go, the world may not trigger me, I am technically of importance, which in itself has created this trigger complex. Because we now see the rise of how easily the lack of emotional intelligence or processing has now resulted in this higher state of complex, now resulting in a very unstable ability to sustain its life. It may have the ability to logically process or absorb information, but does not emotionally apply it, such as intellectually applying knowledge, the act of putting things forth based on what you learned. And because of this environment change, we then see they seek a government change, policy change, legislation change, treatment change, on and on and on and on, which in the understanding of neuroticism, which neuroticism stems from the highly logical but poorly emotionally intelligent development of a person. This is specifically due to the fact that they recognize, because I didn't have that, neither do you get to have that. And in the understanding that in this mentality is where we see the idea that based on the fact that I didn't have that, you don't get to have that either, is where we meet in our equality, or also known as the equity, which the left-leaning mind, which is actually, as I've stated in a psychoanalysis of the current model of the modern world in a previous video, you will see that in that previous analysis, I state that if you specifically are of a left-leaning mind, you are actually empowering the rich and not creating a rebalancing of wealth throughout the earth. You're specifically storing it within one region, resulting in what is known as now that particular section of the world now becoming of communist rule. And the trigger, the new symbol of communism, came the woke mind, which in its woke mind of understanding what to think but not how to think, the woke mind essentially went around telling people this is what should be because I don't want to be triggered, because I just left university and have not gained enough world experience to find a comfort outside of the schooling system I was just in over the last, say, 17 years of life, which is the time it takes from kindergarten until about a bachelor's in education, let alone a master's, or on and on and on, and PhDs, on and on and on. The further we see, the longer we spend in school, the less we have the ability to essentially assimilate ourselves back into society. We have a tougher time, and the more we drive the notion of leftist ideology within the educational system, which in the policies of our politicians feeding us all of these immense amounts of politicians telling us lies. I'm working on that one still, bear with me. But in that particular notion, you might see that in the lies the politicians tell us, we see where the rich actually stem from. If you run as a government official, you are not taxed as an official, which means any business revenue you generate personally for yourself or can implement in your developmental years during your rule within a country, that money goes entirely to you, which now you see where lobbying exists, resulting in the policies that which politicians instill regarding the fundamental values we now obey within a society based on what the politician was bought by. And now we see in leftist ideology, we could say a man like Mark Carney is owned by the Bank of Canada, which he is actively a man in my analysis. Sorry, Carney, do you feel in power? Because I sure do. In terms of the analysis of the Bank of Canada, which it is going in debt further and further and further under liberal rule, which we have been just about 12 years now, starting in 2016. So we are about 10 years. We are at 10 years of liberal rule. We have 2 more under this liberal rule before we may experience a switch, if we vote that way. And in the liberal rule, we see that Mark Carney himself, a man of commerce, also known as banking, has himself understood that in understanding the way interest works and how by being a representative of the Bank of England, he essentially is generating a way for the Canadian government to generate a larger debt deficit, which will take longer time for the Canadian government and its people, specifically Alberta, the backbone of the Canadian economy, to actually have to pay back this national debt, which in a previous analysis of the current modern state of the model of the modern societal norm of its economic structure, in the video of the psychoanalysis of the breakdown of the modern world, you would see that in this particular breakdown, I analyzed the fact that if a bank circulates its money through a country based on a paperless value, but a physical value. In the physical value of things, you would actively see that if a bank circulates its wealth back into its nation, a nation should not go into debt, but its wealth would actively increase in value rather than decrease in value, which as a result begs the question, who owns the Bank of Canada? And this is where we get to you, Mr. Cardney. And unfortunately, as an agent of the Bank of England and as a representative of the Bank of England yourself, you are simply here to ensure that we create a larger potential payback for the Bank of England, which will increase in its time. We then resecure the loans, on and on and on and on. Essentially, you are creating more debt for us. And if we as a democracy want you out, we have the ability to essentially give you the boot at any particular time. Hence, a democracy. This is, as a requirement, a basis around the idea that we vote you in power, we keep you in power. We vote you out of power, you get out of power. Now, in the treason aspect of things, that might be a sore one to heal from, but in the overall aspect of things, I think we have a prosperous future we can stem from as Canadians if we learn to pivot away from the wokeism and learn to get back into living. We all exist here in one nation, whether you are of a Canadian, United States, France, England. Sorry about that one, folks. Sorry, Charles, that might cost you a pretty penny, but unfortunately, the Canadian economy is going down the drain, and in generating more wealth for your kingdom, which itself has conquered, but we are no longer actively generating our wealth, we're degenerating it. We need to step away from England and create our own individual wealth system, which is discussed in my analogy, or specifically my psychoanalysis of the current model behind the economic structure of the modern world. Thank you.